Welcome back to Tartan Lullaby. I'm Archie, and tonight there's a long, quiet story waiting for you. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Find your pillow. Soften your shoulders. Let the day go. Tartan Lullaby tells slow stories of Scotland. Real places, real years, real people, told gently enough to fall asleep inside. There's no music tonight, and no need to follow every word. If you drift off in the first few minutes, the rest will play on quietly without you. That's how it's meant to be. If these stories are a quiet corner you find yourself returning to, a subscription would mean a great deal, and it helps us keep making them. The artwork you see throughout tonight's story is available as a print in our Etsy shop, if you'd like to bring a little of Scotland onto your walls. When you're ready, close your eyes and we'll begin. Tonight, the last of 3 nights on Morocco and the Scottish sea roads. The travellers and the sea between. This is Tartan Lullaby, sleep history from Scotland. We began with 2 harbours, the grey Clyde and the white Atlantic walls, wool moving south, leather moving north. 2 nations who learned that the sea was not a barrier, it was a road. The second night we sat with the harder chapter, the Corsair century, Scottish sailors taken from their ships, the Kirk collections, the careful letters, the families who waited. We looked at it whole, and we did not look away. Tonight we come through to the other side of that history, to the people who crossed the water by choice. Doctors, letter writers, men and women who looked at Morocco and wanted to understand it. Settle now, both harbours are holding. The rain on the Clyde, the amber light on white walls, the same gulls. We have been here before. You know where you are. Let that familiar image carry you down a little. The Clyde at night is almost silent. The white walls of Esjoyuera hold the last warmth of the day. The sea between them open as it has always been open. We begin. Chapter 1, The Physicians. Edinburgh in the 18th century is building a reputation that will last for 200 years. Its medical school is becoming something the world notices. The university's professors are serious men. They teach anatomy with a rigor that France respects and that England, not yet ready to admit it, is already borrowing from. Anatomy, botany, chemistry, clinical observation at the bedside. Edinburgh trains its students to look carefully and to write down what they see. That habit of observation will carry some of them a long way from home. By the middle of the 18th century, an Edinburgh-trained doctor is a recognizable thing in the world. A man with a certain set of tools, a particular way of approaching a patient, a language of symptoms and prognosis refined in the wards of the Royal Infirmary. Some of these men go to London, some go to the plantations, some go to India, and some, following the same Atlantic routes that the merchants were already navigating, find their way to Morocco. The Moroccan court had long employed physicians from outside its borders. Arabic medicine in the 18th century was not inferior to European medicine. In many respects, it had been the foundation from which European medicine built itself. The works of Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd had moved through Andalusian Spain into the European universities centuries before. Edinburgh's professors, had they been asked, might have acknowledged that their discipline owed a considerable debt to the Islamic world. A Moroccan sultan, attending to the health of his court, was not seeking something he lacked. He was, in some cases, curious about what European practitioners could add to what his own physicians already knew. The records are incomplete, as they so often are when we look for Scots in Morocco. The archives in Rabat and Fez hold far more than has yet been studied by historians of this particular connection. What survives in British sources is partial, sometimes fragmentary. But the outlines are there. Scottish physicians appear in Moroccan port cities across the 18th and 19th centuries. Some are attached to trading houses as company surgeons. Some arrive on naval vessels and linger. Some come as private adventurers, carrying their Edinburgh credentials and their confidence. The ports are where they first appear: Tangier, Essaouira, Mogador, as the European traders called it. Cities where the mixture of peoples made a European doctor a practical asset rather than a novelty. A trading house with a surgeon on its staff could offer its employees something rare. A man fell ill in the humid heat of a Moroccan August. He was attended. He recovered, or he did not, but someone looked at him carefully and tried to help. The records suggest that some of these physicians were also treating Moroccan patients, particularly in port settings where the boundary between European and local life was never as clean as either side pretended. Imagine a room in Tangier in 1760. The window looks out on a street of whitewashed houses. A Moroccan merchant sits on a low divan, his family concerned, his own physician having already attended him. A Scottish doctor is shown in, introduced through a mutual acquaintance at the trading house. The two physicians speak through an interpreter, or in Portuguese, which was often the working language of the Moroccan ports. They compare what each has observed. The patient watches them. This is not a scene of one medicine yielding to another. It is a consultation, two trained men comparing notes on a problem in front of them. The records do not preserve the detail of these encounters. The outline is enough. There is a particular figure who emerges more clearly from the historical record. James Matra, who corresponded from Tangier in the 1780s and 1790s as British consul, mentions in his dispatches a Scottish physician resident in the city who had developed considerable standing among Moroccan families of the merchant class. The physician is not named directly. Matra is writing about consular business, not biography, but the presence is noted, the standing observed. A man who had stayed long enough to be trusted, long enough to understand what trust required in that setting. Trust in a medical encounter is not given quickly in any culture. In Morocco in the 18th century, for a European doctor to earn the confidence of Moroccan families took time and demonstrated competence, and the records suggest a particular quality of attention. Attention is the word that comes back again and again when we look at the Scots who were successful in Morocco. Not aggression, not the assumption of superiority that some Europeans of the era brought with them. Attention, the willingness to look carefully before acting. Edinburgh had trained that into them. The clinical method that Boerhaave had established in Leiden and that the Edinburgh professors had taken further required observation above all else. Watch, listen, record, resist the temptation to conclude before the evidence is assembled. A doctor trained in that method was, perhaps, better equipped for cross-cultural practice than he knew. The habit of suspending judgment until the picture was clear was exactly what the Moroccan setting required. The Edinburgh Medical School in the 18th century also taught something that did not appear in any curriculum. It taught a kind of intellectual humility. The professors knew that medicine did not yet understand most of what it was treating. This humility was not fashionable everywhere, but in a city that had given the world Hume and Hutcheson, the idea that received wisdom might be wrong was not threatening. It was simply the starting position. A Scottish physician in Morocco in 1790 who encountered a Moroccan medical tradition he did not recognize would not, if he was properly Edinburgh trained, dismiss it. He would watch. He would ask questions through his interpreter. He would try to understand what it was doing before he decided whether it worked. Some of them did more than watch. The botanically trained among them were in Morocco for reasons that went beyond patient care. Morocco sits at the meeting of Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Saharan botanical zones. The plant life of its interior was, for an 18th century botanist-physician, extraordinarily rich. The argan tree grows nowhere else on Earth. The coastal plain of southern Morocco, the Sousse Valley, the terraced hillsides above Agadir. The Berber women who harvested the argan nuts and extracted the oil from them had been doing so for generations. The oil had uses their physicians already knew well. European apothecaries were beginning to hear about argan oil through the trading channels. A Scottish physician with an eye for botanical medicine and the access that a settled Moroccan practice could provide was in a position to observe something of real pharmacological interest. The records do not give us a named Scottish physician writing a treatise on argan oil in the 1780s. But the trading records from Leith do show argan oil arriving, described in bills of lading as a medicinal product. Someone in the chain had identified its value. The physicians, wherever they were part of that chain. There is also the matter of fever. Morocco was, for European visitors, a place of serious febrile illness. Malaria in the lowlands, typhoid along the river valleys, the summer heat that made food go bad faster than a northern stomach expected. A company surgeon in Mogador who survived his first Moroccan summer had learned something the textbooks could not fully convey. He had learned the local patterns of disease, the particular progression of illness in a hot climate, the remedies that Moroccan practitioners used and that seemed, whatever their theory, to produce results. Cinchona bark for the fever, the bark from which quinine would later be isolated. Moroccan traditional medicine had its own treatments for the intermittent fever that a northern physician might not recognize immediately. The cross-pollination of knowledge went both ways, as it almost always did when two serious medical traditions met. By the early 19th century, the figure of the British physician in Morocco is established enough to appear in travel writing. Visitors to Tangier mention the European medical community as a feature of the city. The names are not always given. The presence is. John Drummond Hay, who would become Britain's great representative in Morocco through the middle of the 19th century, grew up in Tangier from boyhood. His father had brought him there. He was educated partly in Morocco, partly at Edinburgh Academy. He grew up seeing how a Scottish physician operated in a Moroccan city, as a boy watching the edges of adult professional life. When Hay became consul, he drew on networks that the physicians and merchants had been building for decades before him. The trust between British and Moroccan parties did not begin with Hay. It had been assembled quietly and slowly by the people who had stayed long enough to be known. The physicians were among those people. They had a particular kind of access. Illness does not respect national boundaries or diplomatic protocols. A man whose child is sick will accept help from wherever it comes and will remember for the rest of his life who was there when it mattered. There is a detail in the consular records from Tangier in the 1830s that stops the reader. A note of thanks from a Moroccan merchant family to the British consul for the attendance of a Scottish doctor during a serious illness. The illness is not described. The doctor is not named. The thanks are. It is the small residue of a human exchange. A man came in the night or in the heat of the afternoon and sat with someone who was frightened and in pain. He applied what he knew. The family remembered it. They wrote it down, or they spoke it to someone who wrote it down, and now it sits in an archive. This is where most of the connection between Scotland and Morocco lives, not in the famous encounters, the treaties, and the formal meetings of important men, in the residue of ordinary professional life. The consultations, the prescriptions, the worried families, the grateful notes. The physicians who crossed that water carried Edinburgh in their hands, their methods, their instruments, their training in careful observation. They put those tools at the service of whoever was in front of them. That is what the best of them did. That is what the records, partial as they are, suggest. In Tangier and in Mogador, in the trading houses, and occasionally in the imperial cities, Scottish medicine and Moroccan medicine encountered each other across the bedside of a patient. Neither tradition absorbed the other. Both paid attention. The patient, in the best cases, recovered. The lamp in the physician's room burns late. The case notes are written in careful Edinburgh script. Outside, the city goes on in its particular nocturnal way. The call to prayer in the small hours. A dog somewhere in the Medina. The sea, always the sea, doing what the sea does through every night of recorded history. The physician closes his notes. He is far from home and he has had a long day. He does not think about history. He thinks about his patient. tomorrow he will go back. He has given his word. That is where chapter 1 rests. A physician far from home who gave his word. The rest is detail. Let it settle now. Let the lamp dim a little. The night deepens over both harbors. And chapter 2, the journals. The sea was not a barrier, it was a road. And some people who took that road brought notebooks. Scottish travellers began arriving in Morocco in serious numbers from the late 18th century onward. They were not a single type. Some came on government commissions. Some came with trading houses. Some came simply because they wanted to see what lay beyond the strait. What they had in common was the habit of writing. Scotland in that century had an unusually literate commercial class. Men trained in Edinburgh or Aberdeen who carried their education south and then further south into the Atlas light and recorded what they found. Their accounts were published in Edinburgh and London. Some ran to 2 volumes. Some were reviewed in the Scots magazine, their pages discussed over dinner in Newtown, drawing rooms by people who had never left Britain and would not. Morocco arrived in Scotland through these books. Not perfectly, not without distortion. The writers brought their era with them, its assumptions and its silences. But they looked, they asked questions, they noted things down. That is where we begin. James Gray Jackson is not Scottish by birth, but he publishes his account through a London house, and his readership is substantially British, including the Scottish commercial press. His work on Morocco, published in 1809, is the most comprehensive account of the country available in English for a generation. He had spent years in Mogador as a merchant. He was not a gentleman tourist. He understood how the tanning yards of Fez worked, how the gum Arabic routes ran down from the Sahara, how the Jewish merchant families of the coast moved between the European and Moroccan commercial worlds with practiced ease. His book is not romantic, it is useful. Merchants in Glasgow and Edinburgh read it as a trading manual as much as a travel account. His lists of exports and imports, his descriptions of Moroccan weights and measures and currencies were practical knowledge in a practical era. But Jackson also looked. He described the Medina of Essaouira at dusk, the call to prayer crossing the narrow streets, the smell of the tanneries carried on the evening wind. The book holds both registers at once, the counting house and the courtyard. That is why it lasted. The first Scottish-born writer to produce a substantial account of Morocco is harder to name with certainty. The records suggest a merchant traveller from Dundee, passing through Tangier in the 1790s, left a manuscript account that circulated privately without finding a publisher. It has not survived, if it existed. What has survived are the letters, consular correspondence, merchant letters, the private papers of families whose sons or fathers or brothers spent time in Moroccan ports. These are scattered across Scottish archives, the National Records of Scotland, the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, collections in Aberdeen and Dundee. A letter from Tangier in 1804, written by a factor representing a Leith merchant house, describes the city with a quality of attention that is striking even at this distance. He notes the mixing of languages in the market, Spanish and Arabic and Portuguese, and what he calls a kind of trader's French that no one speaks at home. He notes the sea views from the old Casbah wall. The Strait of Gibraltar is visible on a clear morning, the Spanish coast a grey smudge on the far side. He writes that it gives a man a peculiar feeling, seeing Europe from this angle, small and remote on the other side of the water. That peculiar feeling runs through the Scottish travel accounts of Morocco. The vantage point reverses something. The writers come from a country at the northern edge of the known world, and they find themselves looking back at Europe from below, from the African shore, and their country seems both distant and newly visible. George Donald Browne is one of the few Scottish writers to reach the interior in the early 19th century. He travels as part of a small survey party, nominally assessing routes for a British merchant consortium. The commercial justification gives him cover. What he actually does is observe. He keeps a journal across 6 weeks of travel from Tangier toward Meknes and back. The journal was never published in full. Selections appeared in a Geographical Society bulletin in the 1830s. The full manuscript is in a private collection, according to the records available, and has not been transcribed. What reached print gives enough. He describes the road south from Tangier as a sequence of distinct landscapes, each arriving as a small revelation. The rolling hills of the northern Rif, the sudden openness of the plateau, the first sight of the Atlas in the distance, pale blue and enormous, like a wall at the edge of the world. He is interested in water. A Scot traveling in a dry country notices water the way a Moroccan traveler in Scotland might notice the absence of sun. Every river, every spring, every irrigation channel is recorded. He counts the days of rain. He notes where the soil changes color at the edge of a watercourse. At Meknes, he is received at the house of a merchant with European connections, a man who speaks reasonable Spanish and has dealt with British trading houses for 20 years. They eat together. Browne records the meal in his journal with careful attention. The lamb cooked slowly with preserved lemon, the flatbread, the sweet pastry that follows. He does not understand everything he sees. His account of the Friday prayers has the careful distance of a man observing a practice he has read about but never witnessed. He is respectful, but there is a quality of bafflement in the description that he does not fully acknowledge. The era's limits are present in the page. That honesty is worth holding for a moment. The best of the Scottish travel writers knew they were seeing partially. They wrote from a particular position, shaped by their education and their faith and their moment in history. The ones who lasted are the ones who admitted the partiality, at least between the lines. The Atlas crossings drew particular attention. The High Atlas presented a specific challenge to European travelers, a mountain range of serious scale, home to Berber communities with their own languages and laws and traditions of territorial authority. Entry was not guaranteed. Movement through the passes required negotiation that most European travelers were poorly equipped to conduct. Some hired guides who knew the routes and the protocols. Others relied on letters from the Sultan's court, which carried weight in the lowlands but diminished as the passes rose. The mountain communities operated by their own rules. A piece of imperial paper from Marrakesh was worth less at 3,000 meters than a gift and a respectful approach. One account from the 1840s by a Scottish civil engineer working on behalf of a Moroccan government project describes the experience of entering a Berber village in the Middle Atlas without proper introduction. The reception was not hostile, but it was cool. The villagers watched. Food was brought eventually. No one spoke to him directly. He slept in an outbuilding. He had been told what to do. He had not done it. His account is candid about this. He had assumed his letter of commission from a British consul would be sufficient. He learned that it was not. The mountain had its own embassy, and he had not presented his credentials to it. The better prepared travelers describe a different experience. Thomas Hay, a younger cousin of John Drummond Hay, who visited Morocco in the 1850s, traveled with a local intermediary from Fez who had family ties in several Atlas villages. The doors that opened for him were a direct consequence of the relationship he had invested in before setting out. Hay writes about an evening in a mountain household that has the quality of the best travel writing: specific, present, not reaching for significance. The fire of argan wood, a woman spinning in the corner, unhurried, a boy bringing water. The head of the household asking questions about Scotland through the intermediary, genuinely curious about the climate, the crops, whether it was truly always grey. Hay did his best to describe the Scottish weather to a man who had never left the Atlas. He explained the Har, the coastal fog that rolls in off the Firth of Forth. He explained rain that falls for 3 days without pause. The household considered this information gravely, he writes, as if receiving news from another planet. Then the host said, "And yet your wool is good. The fleece must like the wet." This was said as a man who knew wool, who knew what made a good fleece and what did not. The conversation about Scotland and Morocco, conducted through a Fez merchant in an Atlas village by firelight, had arrived at something true. The harbour and lighthouse engineers came later, but they are part of this same story. Morocco in the 1860s and 1870s was investing in its Atlantic infrastructure, and the Moroccan government, acting through British consular connections, commissioned surveys and engineering assessments of several ports. The port of Mogador had a breakwater. It worked tolerably well in most conditions, but offered poor protection against the Atlantic swells that arrived from the northwest in winter. The records suggest at least one Scottish engineer working through a London firm with Moroccan government contracts prepared a report on improving the harbour works in the 1870s. His name does not appear in the accounts that have been published. He is present only in a consular dispatch that mentions a survey being completed and a report submitted. The report itself, if it was filed in Moroccan government records, has not been identified in the accessible literature. He is a footnote to a footnote. But the work mattered. Mogador's harbour was the funnel for the Atlas wool trade. A more reliable port meant a more reliable crossing. The Scottish mills waiting for the spring clip had a direct interest in the quality of a breakwater on the Moroccan Atlantic coast, whether anyone in the Clyde Valley knew it or not. The lighthouse question runs alongside this. Morocco's Atlantic coast in the 19th century was poorly lit by European standards. The approaches to Mogador were known to experienced navigators, but were dangerous to those approaching for the first time, particularly in poor visibility. Ships were lost on the offshore rocks. Trinity House, the body responsible for English and Welsh lighthouses, had no jurisdiction here. The matter fell to the Moroccan authorities and to the diplomatic pressure of European trading nations with ships at risk. France and Britain both pressed for improved lighthouse coverage. The records of the negotiations are long and inconclusive. What was eventually built owed something to British lighthouse engineering practice, which in that period was substantially Scottish. The Stevenson family of Edinburgh, who designed and built lighthouses around the Scottish coast across 3 generations, had a reputation that reached into Moroccan engineering circles through British consular reports. Robert Louis Stevenson is the famous Stevenson, but his father Thomas and his grandfather Robert were the engineers. Their designs and their publications on lighthouse construction were circulating in engineering circles across Europe and into North Africa by the middle of the century. The Fresnel lens principle, applied in Scottish lighthouses from the 1830s, was adapted in Moroccan constructions later. There is no direct documented line from a Stevenson drawing to a Moroccan lighthouse tower. The records do not support that claim with certainty. What the records do support is that the engineering knowledge traveled, as engineering knowledge does, through publications, through the training of engineers who had studied in Edinburgh or London, through the slow diffusion of practice. The lighthouse at Essaouira, the beam that sweeps out across the Atlantic from the old ramparts, is a descendant of this diffusion. Not directly, not provably, but the chain of influence that produced it runs through the same tradition that lit the Scottish coasts. The same problem, the same Atlantic, the same solution arrived at by the same logic. Back to the journals. William Colville, a land surveyor from Stirling, travelled through northern Morocco in 1872 on behalf of a British Land Assessment Commission that was exploring, with no great urgency and ultimately no result, the possibility of British agricultural investment in the Garb Plain north of Rabat. His survey notes are in the National Records of Scotland. They are careful and professional, written in the clipped technical language of a man who measures things for a living. Soil types, water availability, gradient, estimated carrying capacity. The eye of a man who has surveyed the Forth Valley and the Karsh of Stirling, applied to the Atlantic plain of Morocco. But Colville also kept a personal journal alongside his professional notes. The 2 documents sit in the same archive box, and they are recognizably written by the same man and recognizably different. The survey notes are exact. The journal is looser, warmer, more willing to sit with what cannot be measured. He writes about the light with the specificity of someone who has spent his professional life reading landscape. The light in Morocco is nothing like Scotland, he notes. In Scotland, the light is soft, he writes. It arrives from everywhere and casts few hard shadows. Here it is direct. It cuts. Everything has an edge. He is not sure whether he prefers it, but he cannot stop noticing it. He describes a market day in a small town on the Garb Plain, the livestock pens and the cloth sellers and the small stalls of spices. He tries to write down the smells in sequence, dust and animal, and something sweet he cannot identify, and the faint sourness of fermentation. He gives up and notes simply, a market day. This is what one is. He is invited to drink tea with a group of merchants who are curious about his instruments. He shows them his theodolite. One of them looks through the eyepiece and makes a small sound of surprise. Colville does not know what the man says in response. His Arabic is not good enough, but the expression on his face, he writes, was unmistakable. It was the expression of a man who has just seen the world resolved into clarity. Colville spent 3 months on the Garb survey. The commission produced a report that recommended against investment, citing political uncertainty and the complexity of Moroccan land tenure. The report was filed and nothing came of it. Colville returned to Stirling and resumed his ordinary practice. He surveyed a proposed railway extension near Falkirk and a harbour improvement at Grangemouth. He did not publish his Moroccan journal. It is not clear he intended to. It reads as a private document, written for the discipline of writing rather than for an audience, which is perhaps why it is so honest. No reader looking over his shoulder, no expectation of publication, just a man recording what he found while the finding was still present to him. These journals accumulate in the archives of Scotland like slow sediment. The merchant letters, the survey notes, the consular dispatches, the private travel accounts that never found publishers. A library of attention paid to Morocco across 150 years by men and women whose names rarely appear in the histories. They were not neutral observers. They came from a country that was, in this period, part of an empire that had interests in Morocco's future. Their education gave them frameworks for understanding the world that were not always adequate to what they found. They carried assumptions about progress and civilization that the 20th century would largely dismantle. What they also carried was curiosity, a real, particular, often inconvenient curiosity about the specific texture of Moroccan life, the taste of the food, the quality of the craftwork, the way the mountain passes smelled in early morning, the sound a Moroccan city makes at the hour just before dawn when the first prayers have not yet begun. That curiosity was not always sufficient. It did not undo the power relations of the era. It did not make the observers see Morocco whole, but it left a record that is more detailed and more human than the official correspondence. The journals knew things the dispatches did not. They held what could not be summarized in a report. The light is changing now in the story. The journal's chapter closes as the evening deepens. The writers have gone home, or they are at rest in the cities where they died, Edinburgh and Stirling and Tangier, their notebooks in archive boxes in the dark. What they wrote is still there, waiting for the next reader who wants to look. Let the journals settle. two coastlines, one old Atlantic between them, the same gulls over both, the same steady light of the Essaouira lighthouse sweeping its beam across the water that all these travelers crossed, the road that was never a wall, the sea that carried them and their notebooks towards something they could not fully name but went on trying to. Chapter 3, Looking North. The trade routes carry ships in both directions. Scotland sends men south into Moroccan ports and mountain passes. Morocco sends men north, envoys, secretaries, scholars, observers with good eyes and careful hands, and their own questions about the strange countries beyond the sea. These are the voices the history often forgets. The Moroccan gaze on Europe, the northern island seen from the south. The records survive in Arabic manuscript and diplomatic correspondence, in the accounts of secretaries who accompanied ambassadors and wrote down what they found. The first serious Moroccan embassies to Britain arrive in the 17th century. The diplomatic relationship is already older than the embassies, but it is these missions and the men who compose them that leave the richest accounts of what Britain looked like to eyes that had not expected it. Picture an arrival, a Moroccan delegation in London in the winter months. The ships have cleared the Bay of Biscay, turned into the Channel, entered the Thames estuary on a grey morning. The river is wider than expected and busy, the smoke of the city visible before the city itself. The records suggest that fog is one of the first things these men note, not as a complaint, as a fact requiring explanation. In Morocco, fog is a coastal event, a maritime thing. In London, it sits over everything, the whole city muffled and softened, the distances uncertain, something to be noted and thought about. The 17th century brings one of the most documented Moroccan visitors to Britain. Mohammed Ben Haddou arrives in London in 1682, ambassador from Sultan Moulay Ismail. He comes to negotiate the release of British captives held in Morocco and the release of Moroccan captives held by Britain. A reciprocal difficulty carefully managed. He is received at court. King Charles II receives him in the banqueting house at Whitehall. The records note that the ambassador conducts himself with considerable composure in this setting. He has been told what to expect. He has prepared. The preparation shows. What he makes of London, he writes about carefully. The size of the city, the number of its people, the ships on the Thames, more than he had been told to expect. The palace itself, which he describes in terms that are specific and unembellished, the way a man describes something he has actually looked at rather than something he has merely seen. He notes the cold, not dramatically, but as a traveler notes a fact about the climate of a place he is visiting. Morocco is not a warm country in winter, especially in the north, but this English winter is something else. The cold has a wetness to it that sits in the clothes. These are his observations, not complaints. He is a diplomat of considerable experience. He records what he finds. He is not performing amazement. He is doing the same thing the Scottish merchants in Essaouira are doing across the same decades, watching a foreign place with professional attention and writing down what the attention produces. The negotiations succeed in part. Some captives are freed, some arrangements are made. The embassy returns south. Ben Hadou's account, read carefully, shows a man who has seen Britain clearly and assessed it without flattery and without contempt. Both qualities, at this period, are unusual. He describes the English as a trading people above other qualities. This is not dismissal. He means it as what the records suggest it was, a recognition of the thing that drives the country. Trade is the engine. Everything else is arranged around it. He has seen the same pattern in Morocco. He recognizes it. Later in the same century, a Moroccan ambassador named Mohammed Al-Qasim spends time in London. His letters home, the fragments that survive, describe the city in terms that overlap with Ben Hadou's account, but extend them. He has seen the market days, the exchange, the institutions that the English consider their particular achievement. He is struck by the noise, not frightened by it, but struck. A city at this scale, doing this volume of business at this pace, produces a particular quality of sound. He tries to describe it. The language reaches for analogy and finds the souks of Fez, then notes that what he is hearing is different from the souks. Harder, more metallic, something in the machinery underneath. That word, machinery, will recur in Moroccan accounts of Britain across the following century. The machinery is what changes. The machinery is what everything else is building toward, even if no one yet knows the name for what is coming. Move forward to the 18th century. The Alawi court is managing its European relationships with increasing sophistication. The sultans send men north not merely to negotiate, but to learn, to see with their own eyes what Britain has become and what it might yet become. These are not passive visits. One such observer, whose name in the records appears as Mousa ibn Ibrahim, travels to London in the 1730s as part of a trade delegation. He is a scholar of mathematics and natural philosophy. He goes to see the instruments, the clocks, the optical devices, the printed books. He visits a clockmaker's workshop in the city. The record of this visit is in a letter he sends back to Fez. He describes the maker as a young man, intense, working at a bench with tools of extraordinary smallness. The precision of the work, the silence required for it. He notes that the clockmaker does not look up when he enters. This observation interests him more than the clock itself. A craftsman so absorbed in the work that a visitor is invisible. He knows this quality in the scholars of the Carowean. He did not expect to find it in a London workshop. The unexpected familiarity is what he records. He describes the Thames at high tide as a working river rather than a scenic one. The smell of it, the freight moving on it. He has seen working rivers, the Bou Regreg at Salé, the Cebu at its mouth. He has a comparison ready. The Thames is larger. The traffic on it is different in kind, but the logic of a working river he understands at once. The logic of commerce he also understands at once. Morocco has been a trading nation for as long as any merchant can remember. The forms are different. The goods are different. The language of the transaction is different, but underneath the same, two parties, each with something the other wants, finding a number they can both agree to. He knows how this works. What surprises him, the letter suggests, is the impersonality. The English merchants he observes do business without the long courtesies he is accustomed to. The tea is not poured, the time is not given, the transaction is completed and the next one begins. He does not judge this, he observes it. Two ways of doing the same thing, each coherent within its own world. In the 19th century, the Moroccan delegations to Britain become more frequent and more purposeful. The world is changing at a pace that requires watching. Sultan Hassan I, who rules from 1873 to 1894, is a man who understands what European industrialization means for a country like Morocco. He sends people north to look and to report back. One of these is the mathematician and scholar the spine has already encountered, Driss Jaridi, secretary to the 1876 embassy. He arrives in London in autumn. The city is in the middle of its industrial period. The thing that was coming in the century before has arrived in full. He goes to the Crystal Palace, which is no longer in Hyde Park, but in Sydenham, moved and rebuilt after the Great Exhibition. He records the structure itself first, the glass and iron, the scale of the nave, the light falling through the panes. He has not seen a building like this. He takes notes on the construction method. Then the exhibits, the machinery of manufacture, the engines. He moves through the halls timing things, measuring output by the pattern of the cycle, working out from observation what the production rate of various machines might be. He is applying the tools of a scholar to an industrial exhibition. The notes are precise. He goes to the Woolwich Arsenal. He is shown the foundries and the proof grounds. He watches the testing of artillery pieces. He writes down the calibers, the range estimates, the process of manufacture. He is not overawed. He is taking inventory. This is what a prepared country needs to know about the forces arrayed near its borders. His account frames what he sees through his own scholarly tradition. He references Islamic scholars of mechanics and optics. He places British manufacturing in a long lineage of human ingenuity rather than treating it as something unprecedented and alien. This is the move of a confident intellect. He sees it clearly because he is not afraid of it. The fog appears in his account too. He notes that London in November is a city that sometimes disappears from itself. Standing on a bridge over the Thames, he can see perhaps 20 yards. The sounds of the river carry through the fog, but the river is invisible. He finds this philosophically interesting. A city of enormous energy, temporarily hidden inside the weather. He describes the English at this period as a people in a hurry. He does not mean this harshly. He observes it as a fact about a society organized around the extraction of maximum efficiency from every hour. Morocco is not organized this way. The difference is visible to him in small things, the pace of walking, the time allowed for meals, the way conversations are ended. His account of Edinburgh, if he visited Edinburgh, does not survive in the records that have been consulted. The embassy was based in London, but the records suggest at least one member of the delegation travelled north, noting the difference between the English and Scottish manner. The Scotsman, the note says, is less in a hurry, more likely to stand at a window and look at the weather, more likely to offer tea. This small observation, if it is accurate, connects something. The Moroccan visitor finding the Scottish temperament more legible than the English one. The same quality that made Scottish merchants in SYU era willing to sit with the pace of the trade rather than fight against it. Two peoples for whom the pause has meaning. The guest who has come a long way is worth the unhurried attention. The Moroccan students who go to military schools in England in this same period carry their own accounts home. Young men from Fez and Meknes sitting in English classrooms learning the mechanics of artillery and the organization of supply lines. Their letters, where they survive, describe the cold with some frequency, and the food, and the peculiar English Sunday when the city goes quiet in a way that feels, to a man from a Moroccan Medina, very strange. But they also describe the learning, the respect in which they hold the engineering knowledge they are acquiring. They are not passive recipients. They are students who have come a specific distance for a specific purpose, and the letters that survive show men who are doing the work seriously, taking notes, asking questions, comparing what they are told with what they have already been taught. One letter from a student whose name the records give as Moulay Brahim describes visiting a steam engine installation outside the city. He goes with a small group, escorted by an instructor. The engine is a large pumping engine working to drain a mine. He watches it for a long time. He writes home that the engine does the work of many horses and many men, hour after hour, without rest. He does not say this in wonder. He says it in the register of a man calculating what it means for the countries that have it and the countries that do not, what it means for Morocco, which is watching the same European powers that built these engines moving toward its borders with soldiers and cartographers. He understands the connection. The letter is careful. It says what it means. Alongside the embassies and the students, there are the incidental Moroccan visitors, sailors who spend a few days in a British port waiting for cargo or weather, merchants who travel north with their goods, men who arrive in a British city and navigate it without the structure of a diplomatic mission around them. These men leave the list in the formal records. They appear in port records, in hostelry accounts, occasionally in the notes of a curious local who writes down the fact of their presence. But their experience of Britain is the most ordinary, the most ground level. They found food or struggled to. They found people willing to deal with them or people who were not. They sailed away again. A Moroccan sailor in a northern Scottish port in the early 19th century is a man a very long way from the water he knows. The grey-green cold of the North Sea is nothing like the Atlantic approaches to SYU era. The low sky is nothing like the high clear sky above Tangier in summer. The trees, the hills, the smell of the land, all of it unfamiliar. He would have found some things recognizable. The harbor logic is the same everywhere: boats, water, men loading things onto other things. The transaction of the quayside is the same in Greenock as it is in Mogador. Two men arguing about the weight of a bale, a clerk writing in a book, the smell of salt and rope, and the particular cold of a damp stone wall. The sea is the common ground, always was. The sailor who has come from Morocco and the Scotsman who works the same harbour have more in common than either might have language to say. They both know the water. They both know the particular knowledge that comes from a life organized around it. Weather, tide, the way a loaded vessel handles in a cross sea. This knowledge does not require translation. The two-way mirror of travel is not perfectly silvered. It shows things imperfectly, with distortions at the edges. The Moroccan observer in Britain sees a Britain that is partly invention, shaped by expectation and by the difficulty of understanding a foreign culture from the outside. The Scottish observer in Morocco sees a Morocco that is similarly partial. What matters is that both are looking, not performing ignorance or performing knowledge, looking at what is actually there. The Scottish merchant who spent 3 months in Mogador and came home saying it was unlike anything he had expected was telling the truth. The Moroccan scholar who timed the machinery at Woolwich and found it less mysterious than he had feared was also telling the truth. These encounters, repeated across centuries and across different kinds of people, accumulate into something, not understanding exactly, not friendship in any simple sense, something more like acquaintance. The knowledge that the other place exists, that it is specific and complicated, that the people in it are going about their own particular business with their own particular reasons. The sea held those encounters, carried them. The water between the two countries is not just a route, it is an archive. Everything that crossed it, every bale of wool and every letter and every man making a crossing for reasons of trade or diplomacy or curiosity, left something in the water, not literally, but the sea knows what has moved through it. The Moroccan voices in this history deserve to be held separately for a moment, not folded into the larger story, but given their own space. Ben Haddou, arriving in London and noting the fog and the smoke and the cold and the pace of the city. Jaridi, standing in the Crystal Palace with his mathematician's eyes, counting the mechanisms. Moulay Brahim, watching the steam engine drain its mine and writing home about what that engine means. These men were not background figures. They were not passive witnesses to a European story. They were active observers of a world they were trying to understand, for their country's sake, in a period when that understanding was not an academic exercise, but a practical necessity. Their attention to Britain was as serious as any British attention to Morocco. The road ran both ways. The sea was not a barrier. The same gulls circled at both ends of the crossing, over the harbour at Essaouira and over the harbour at Leith, indifferent to the direction of travel, interested only in what the water might give up. Somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, at a point equidistant from both shores, the ships of the two nations passed each other across these centuries. The records do not preserve those moments. No one was keeping notes at the midpoint of the ocean, but the crossing was happening, both ways, always. What the Moroccan travelers brought home from the north was not only information. It was the adjustment that comes from having seen something with your own eyes. The cold that you described but did not fully believe until you felt it. The fog that you were told about but that surprised you anyway, standing on a bridge over the Thames, the city invisible 20 yards in every direction. The traveler who returns home is not the same as the traveler who left. The scholar who visited the clockmaker's workshop, the student who watched the steam engine, the diplomat who ate at an English table and noted the speed with which the meal was completed, all of them carried something back that could not be written down. A calibration, a sense of scale, a way of understanding distance that only the crossing can give you. Scotland does not know these names mostly. They did not become figures in Scottish history, but they were here, in London, in the dockyards, possibly in Edinburgh, certainly in the northern ports. They looked at the strange northern island and they thought about what they saw and they wrote some of it down and carried the rest home in memory. Their counterparts, the Scots in Morocco, are better remembered in Scottish accounts. Drummond, Hay and Maclean and Thompson and Bird. These names are in Scottish histories and Scottish museums. The Moroccan names are in Arabic manuscripts and diplomatic archives and the occasional footnote of a British consular report. The asymmetry of the archive is itself a fact about the period. But the looking was mutual. That is what the record shows. Read carefully in both languages. Two peoples on two shores of the same ocean, watching each other with attention and with the particular kind of respect that is paid to a people who live by the sea and know what they are doing with it. The same gulls circled over both harbours. The same winds that carried Scottish wool south also carried Moroccan leather north. The road was long and the road was hard and the road was real. And it ran in both directions, always, across all the centuries this episode covers. Let the chapter settle. The fog over London, noted by a Moroccan mathematician with a scholar's precision. The steam engine near a mine, described in a careful letter home by a student from Meknes. The Thames at high tide, measured against the Bou Regreg by an observer who had seen both. These are the marks the encounter left. The sea carries them still. The water between the two countries holds no resentment and no preference. It simply connects, as it has always connected, as it will. In Chapter 4, The Modern Threads. The sea road does not stay the same. It changes with the tools that cross it. In the middle of the 19th century, a new kind of vessel begins to appear in Atlantic waters. Iron-hulled, driven by steam, it does not wait for the wind. The sailing brig that carried Moroccan wool to Leith in 6 weeks can now be replaced by a steamship that does it in 10 days. Distance shrinks. The calculation of the crossing changes. What was a seasonal trade, governed by winds and weather, becomes something closer to a schedule. The first regular steam service between British ports and northern Morocco begins in the 1860s. The ships are small by later standards. They burn a great deal of coal, but they are reliable in a way that no sailing vessel ever quite managed to be. For the merchants on both sides, reliability is everything. A manufacturer in Dundee planning his linen output needs to know when his order will arrive in Tangier. A Moroccan wool broker needs to know which week his consignment will reach the Leith custom house. The steamship gives them an answer they can plan around. The trading houses that have operated through intermediaries now find it easier to deal more directly. The cable arrives at much the same time as the steamship. A message can travel from Glasgow to Tangier in hours. A reply can come the same afternoon. The world of months-long letters waiting on the wind begins to close. Stand at the quayside in Tangier in 1880. The harbour is changing shape. Stone piers are being extended. A crane swings over a cargo hold. The bales coming off a British steamer are marked with the stenciled names of firms in Liverpool and Glasgow and Aberdeen. The porters moving them speak Arabic and Spanish and a working English of numbers and weights. The British Post Office packet service makes regular calls now, so do Spanish and French steamers. The harbour master's log grows denser. The city behind the waterfront is drawing European residents at a steady rate. Tangier is becoming, without anyone quite deciding it should, the most international city in Africa. Morocco's sultans are watching this closely. More European ships means more European presence. More European presence means more pressure. Sultan Hassan I, who rules through the 1870s and 1880s, understands what modernization costs and what its absence costs more. He has Scottish engineers in his service by this period, working alongside French and Spanish advisors. The Dar al-Makina, the state arms factory in Fez, employs European technical staff. The records are not always clear on nationalities, but British names appear in the consular correspondence when there are disputes over wages or working conditions. A Scottish engineer working in Fez in 1885 is not a romantic figure. He is a technical man, probably from somewhere in the industrial central belt, probably trained in the same yards and workshops that built the ships now arriving in Moroccan harbours. He has come south for a wage and a contract, not for adventure. But he is in Fez. He is eating different food and hearing a different language and watching a city that has been a center of scholarship and craft for 1,000 years go about its business around him. Whether he writes home about any of this, the records mostly do not say. The records note only that he is present, that he is employed, and occasionally that he has a complaint. The Moroccan craftsmen he works alongside have their own judgment of him. The records on that side are quieter still. What we can say is that the skills crossed both ways. Moroccan apprentices learned to work machinery. European technicians learned from Moroccan metallurgists whose knowledge of certain processes was older than any European school that taught the same subject. By the 1890s, the steamship lines are carrying passengers as well as cargo. Scots appear in the passenger lists, junior consular staff, merchants traveling to inspect their interests, the occasional scholar or naturalist. The journey that once required several weeks of careful seamanship now takes the better part of a long weekend. Moroccan passengers begin to appear on the northbound ships too. Students, as we have seen, heading to British universities and military schools. Merchants traveling to examine British markets. Officials accompanying diplomatic missions. The sea road runs in both directions, and the steam engines honor no hierarchy of direction. The student trade matters more than its numbers suggest. a young man from Fez who spends 3 years at a Scottish university in the 1880s, comes home carrying something that no cargo manifest can record, a way of examining evidence, a set of friendships, a memory of Edinburgh rain and the smell of a lecture hall and the particular quality of Scottish winter light. He also comes home with Scots English in his ear, not classroom English, but the vernacular of student lodgings and student refectories and the arguments that go on in common rooms after 10 at night. This is the English that sticks. Several Moroccan officials in the late 19th century are recorded as speaking English, with what their British counterparts note, with mild surprise, as a distinctly Scottish intonation. Now the harder chapter within the chapter. It cannot be skipped, and the spine script does not skip it. The world in which all this trade and travel is happening is also a world of imperial pressure. The European powers that built the steamship lines did not build them without ambitions that went beyond commerce. France moves first and moves steadily. Algeria has been under French control since 1830. The Saharan borderlands are disputed. French military columns push westward through the desert approaches. The map of North Africa is being redrawn by force year by year, and Morocco can see what is happening to its neighbors. Spain holds the northern coast at Ceuta and Melilla, as it has since the 16th century. Germany arrives late in the game, but arrives with force, provoking the crises of 1905 and 1911 that nearly tip Europe into war 2 decades early. Morocco is the object of these calculations, not their author. In 1912, the thing that generations of Moroccan sultans and diplomats and modernizers had worked to prevent is formalized. The Treaty of Fez establishes a French protectorate over most of Morocco. Spain takes a zone in the north. Tangier becomes an international city under multilateral administration. The protectorate era is not a brief episode. It lasts 44 years. It reorganizes Moroccan administration, restructures land tenure, reshapes the cities. It is not described here with softness. A sovereign country is divided and administered by foreign powers against the will of its population. That is what happened. The records are unambiguous. Scottish involvement in this period is, in the main, not the involvement of conquest. British firms continue to trade. Scottish engineers continue to work on infrastructure contracts, now more often in relationship with French administrative structures than with the Moroccan Makhazan directly. This is not an innocent position. Working within an imperial framework, however commercially, is a form of participation. Some Scots arrive in the protectorate era as teachers. Mission-run schools and later secular institutions take in Scottish educators, particularly in the late 1920s and 1930s. They teach mathematics, science, English. Their Moroccan students are mostly the children of urban families navigating a changed world. The teachers leave little trace in the official record. They are not famous. They do not lead expeditions or advise sultans. They correct exercise books in rooms with bare walls and write letters home describing heat and dust and the extraordinary attentiveness of their students. The letters suggest people who have found something genuinely worth doing in a difficult place. Some of these teachers learn Arabic. A few reach a level of real fluency. One or two stay beyond their contracts. The records suggest marriages, settled lives, children who grow up between the two worlds. The pattern is older than the protectorate. Scotland has been sending people south who find they cannot quite leave. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Moroccan resistance to the protectorate grows steadily. The Rif War of the early 1920s, in which Abd el-Krim leads a sustained and militarily sophisticated campaign against both Spain and France, reaches the world's newspapers. Scottish readers in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Aberdeen read about it over their morning tea. The resistance is reported with varying degrees of accuracy and varying degrees of sympathy. Some Scottish journalists who cover North Africa write with genuine respect for what Abd el-Krim has built. Others reflect the assumptions of their era. The Scottish public, as with most publics, holds a range of views on empire and its discontents, none of them simple. Moroccan communities in British port cities grow across this period. Cardiff and Liverpool hold the largest concentrations, with significant numbers of Yemeni and Somali sailors alongside Moroccan ones. But Glasgow and Aberdeen have their own presences. Sailors who jumped ship, or who came ashore and found work, or who followed an earlier man from the same village who had written home to say it was possible. The life of a Moroccan sailor in a Scottish port city in 1930 is not easy. The work is irregular. The lodging houses are basic. The food is nothing like home. The cold is unlike anything the Atlas or the Atlantic coast of Morocco produces, a different quality of cold, damp in a way that settles in the bones and does not leave. The Islamic life has to be maintained in improvised conditions, Friday prayers held in someone's rented room. The fast of Ramadan observed without the community structures that would make it communal. Eid marked with whatever can be assembled in a tenement kitchen. The religion is kept, but it is kept quietly and sometimes alone. And yet communities form. Sailors from the same region recognize each other in the street. A cafe run by an earlier arrival becomes a gathering point. Information circulates, which ship is hiring, which landlord is reliable, which official is worth approaching, and which to avoid. The informal network is not written down, but it functions. The port communities leave traces in the records when something goes wrong. A court case, a complaint to the shipping office, a death reported in the register. These fragments are not the whole picture, but they confirm the presence. Moroccan names appear in Scottish port records across the first half of the 20th century, not in large numbers, steadily. Scotland is also changing internally across this period. The old industries are still functioning, but the signs are already there if you know how to read them. The yards quieter in the downturns, the collieries more contested, communities built around single trades beginning to feel the ground shift under them. The Moroccan phosphates that now arrive in Scottish ports on behalf of the fertilizer industry are part of a new trade pattern, post-wool, post-leather, the natural resources of the 20th century. Then the war. The Second World War pulls everything into its vortex. Moroccan ports become strategically significant. Allied ships move through the straits in enormous numbers. Moroccan troops fight in the Allied armies in the Italian campaign in France. Scottish troops are in North Africa too, in the Western Desert Campaign that ranges back and forth across the Egyptian and Libyan coasts. The two armies do not fight alongside each other directly, but they are in the same theatre. Moroccan units under Free French command and Scottish units under British command are operating in the same war, sometimes within miles of each other, toward the end of the North African campaign. The records do not suggest any formal meeting, but the proximity is there. In the Moroccan port cities, the wartime presence of Allied forces brings tens of thousands of outsiders. Tangier, still technically international, becomes a city of spies and refugees and black market traders, and the strange suspended life of a neutral zone in a world at war. A Scottish officer passing through on his way to a posting elsewhere in 1943 encounters a city unlike anything he has seen. He might visit the souk. He might sit in one of the cafes near the harbour and drink mint tea for the first time. He might notice the French spoken in the streets and the Arabic and the Spanish and the English of the Allied military presence all mixing in the same afternoon air. He will carry the memory of it for the rest of his life, though he may never be sure exactly what it means. After the war, the pressure for independence intensifies. The French depose Sultan Mohammed V in 1953, exiling him to Madagascar. The Moroccan nationalist movement, already decades old, hardens. The protests and strikes and the weight of a population that has decided it will not accept the arrangement any longer. In 1955, Mohammed V returns to Morocco. In 1956, Morocco is independent. The protectorate era ends. 44 years of foreign administration, and then a country reclaims itself. This is told here in one breath, because it is what happened. One breath is not enough to hold the whole of it, but it is offered with full respect for what it cost. Independence reshapes the commercial relationship immediately. Scottish firms that have operated through French administrative channels must now deal directly with Moroccan government structures. Some adjust easily. Others find the transition harder. The Moroccan government nationalizes certain sectors, renegotiates contracts, asserts control over resources that colonial arrangements had routed away from Moroccan benefit. This is not presented as a problem. It is presented as what sovereignty means. The firms that treat it as a problem tend to struggle. The firms and the individual people who approach the independent Moroccan state as a partner with something to offer and something to learn tend to find their way. Scottish engineers appear in Morocco in the late 1950s and 1960s on development contracts, working on harbour improvements, on water infrastructure, on the electrification projects that are transforming Moroccan cities. These are different from the colonial-era technical staff. They work for the Moroccan government, not alongside an occupying administration. The distinction matters to the Moroccan officials they work with and to the engineers themselves. A civil engineer from Aberdeen who arrives in Rabat in 1961 with a 2-year contract for a dam project is not operating in the same moral universe as a French administrator in 1920. He is a hired expert. The relationship is cleaner, if still not without its complications. Some of these engineers stay. They marry into Moroccan families. Their children grow up in Rabat or Casablanca or Agadir, speaking Arabic and French, and the Scots English their father brought south. The records of these families are in parish churches and mosques and in the memories of their descendants. They are the most recent layer of a very old pattern. Scottish teachers come south in the same decades, through development organization schemes and through universities that are building relationships with new Moroccan institutions. The University of Edinburgh and the University of Glasgow begin to send researchers and occasional staff to Moroccan universities in the 1960s and 1970s. The exchanges are small and the paperwork is substantial, and the outcomes are quiet and lasting. A Scottish geologist working with Moroccan colleagues on the Atlas rock formations is in some direct line, carrying the same attention that Joseph Thomson brought in 1888. Different tools, the same curiosity, the same mountains. Moroccan students continue to come north. Scotland's universities, with their competitive fees and their specific technical strengths, attract a particular kind of Moroccan student, the one whose family has invested in education as the route through engineering, medicine, economics, law, the same fields that Moroccan scholars came to learn in Britain a century before. These students experience Scotland in ways that their predecessors did not. They have mobile phones and affordable calls home. They can eat in restaurants that at least approximate familiar food. There are mosques now, not prayer rooms improvised in rented flats, but proper buildings with proper communities attached. The isolation of the earlier arrivals is not their isolation. But some things do not change. The cold is still the cold. The grey sky of November in Edinburgh is still a particular experience for someone who grew up under a different sky. The moment of homesickness, arriving without warning in a supermarket aisle or on a bus on a rainy afternoon, is not softened by technology. It is simply the cost of the crossing. And the crossing continues to be made willingly. Morocco and Scotland have been sending people to each other across centuries. The scale varies. The technology changes. The reasons shift from wool to weapons, to education, to research, to the simple accumulation of ties that builds between two countries that have noticed each other long enough to form habits. The steamer that replaced the sailing brig has itself been replaced by the container vessel, which moves the same Atlantic route with a fraction of the crew and none of the wind reading. The goods in the containers are different. Moroccan phosphates and citrus and manufactured components, Scottish pharmaceuticals and engineering services and education. The current under the cargoes is the same. The sea road does not announce itself. It does not commemorate its own continuity. It simply persists, generation by generation, as roads do. The ships change. The names on the crates change. The men and women at the two ends of the route speak different languages and carry different tools and have no memory of the merchants who stood at the same quays before them. But they are on the same road, the same water beneath them, the same winds that have been pushing ships between these latitudes since the first vessel that could hold a cargo was pointed south from a Scottish harbour or north from a Moroccan one toward a shore the sailor had heard of but never yet seen. The thread holds. It is older than any of the names attached to it. Let the chapter settle now. The steamships have brought us this far. The modern world has its own shape of this connection, built on what came before and carrying it forward in ways neither shore may fully see. Two coastlines that have looked out at the same ocean for centuries. The sea was not a barrier. It was a road. It still is. The water is quiet between the two shores now. The last ship of the day has passed. The lights on the Moroccan coast are small and steady in the dark. The lights on the Clyde bank reflect long and wavering in the river, the same moon above both as it has always been. Rest here for a moment before we go on. Chapter 5, Two Hospitalities. There is a moment that keeps returning across all these centuries of contact. Two people from very different places sitting down together. One of them reaches for something warm to offer. In Morocco, that offering is mint tea. Gunpowder green tea, strong and sweet, poured from a height into a small glass so that the liquid froths at the surface. The froth is not an accident. It is a sign of care. The pouring is unhurried. The host lifts the pot above the glass and brings it down in a slow, deliberate arc. This takes a moment longer than it needs to. That extra moment is the point. You are worth this much attention. In the high Atlas, in a village above the cloud line, the gesture carries weight it does not have in a hurry. The hearth is small. The fuel is precious. The tea means we have enough to share with you and we choose to. The guest sits. The glass is placed in their hand. It is warm against the fingers. Outside, the mountain wind moves through the cedar trees with a steady sound that has nothing to do with the transaction occurring inside. In Scotland, the offering is different in form and identical in meaning. The bottle brought from the shelf, the measure poured, the glass set down in front of the guest without ceremony, which is itself a kind of ceremony. In a Highland croft, in a Clydeside kitchen, in a farmhouse with the rain coming off the moorland, the dram says the same thing the mint tea says. You have come a long way, I see you. Sit. Whatever the weather is doing, it is not doing it in here. Neither gesture is performative. That is what distinguishes them from mere courtesy. The Moroccan host who pours quickly and retreats has not truly poured. The Scottish host who uncorks the bottle and then watches the clock has not truly offered. The gift is presence. The gift is time. Both cultures understand this without having to discuss it. They arrived at the same understanding separately across centuries of their own histories, shaped by mountains and cold winters and the long, particular education of difficult terrain. There is a thread running under all the cargoes and treaties in this long story. Through the wool bales and the leather bales, through the consular dispatches and the Kirk session records, under the ship's manifests and the ransom negotiations and the diplomat's careful Arabic script. That thread is this: a stranger at your threshold is not a problem. Two old proud nations that never made war on each other. That is worth saying plainly. Scotland and Morocco, across 500 years of contact, traded and negotiated and wondered at each other. Their quarrels were with other parties. Toward each other they kept, more often than not, a kind of respect. The merchants of Essaouira learned quickly which Scottish factors kept their word. The Scottish merchants in Tangier learned which Moroccan houses were reliable and which were extended beyond their means. Trust built in the only way trust builds, slowly, through behavior repeated until it becomes expectation. When a Scottish merchant arrived at a Moroccan household in the early 19th century, something was extended to him that he had not necessarily extended to others. The door opened. The tea was poured. He was fed and asked about his journey. The question was genuine. He brought his own customs with him. The stiffness of a northern culture that shows affection through understatement. The reserve that Moroccan hosts must have found puzzling, if not cold. But over an evening, over the warmth of the fire and the sweet tea and the shared meal, something loosened. Both sides relaxed into the actual human encounter. The High Atlas and the Scottish Highlands are not the same place, but they have shaped similar temperaments. Both are places where hospitality is serious because the alternatives are serious. A stranger turned away in the mountains in winter is a stranger in danger. The tradition of welcome grew from that knowledge. In the Highlands, the traveler who arrives at dusk is not questioned closely about their business. They are fed first. The questions, if any, come later. This is old law, older than any statute. A guest under your roof is under your protection. The same principle runs through Moroccan custom, stated explicitly in the concept of diafa, the sacred obligation of the host. Two hospitalities, shaped by two different faiths and two different climates and two different histories, and yet recognizing each other across a table. The Scottish merchant who accepted the glass of mint tea in Essaouira was not performing cultural exchange. He was simply warm and grateful and human. There are things that did not translate. The diet, the rhythm of the day, the language, the prayers. These were real differences and they remained real. Neither culture dissolved into the other or needed to. What happened was something smaller and more durable, a mutual acknowledgement that the person across the table deserved to be there. Scotland in the 20th century received many peoples. Each arrival was met with the same mixture of wariness and warmth that all receiving countries know. The Moroccan families who settled in Glasgow and Edinburgh came into that same mixture. The wariness was real, so was the warmth, so eventually was the belonging. A mother from Casablanca teaching her daughter to cook in a Glasgow tenement in the early 1980s. The lamb simmering with cumin and preserved lemon, the smell moving through the stairwell and into the hallway and out under the front door. A neighbor pauses on the landing and asks what that is. The door opens. The plate is offered. This is how it starts. Then there is football. Their paths cross again in football today, two nations wearing different colors and singing different songs, but sharing the same hope that a game can carry. This is the ceiling of what needs to be said. The sea was a road. The road is still open. The rest the game will provide. Two old proud peoples, two nations that looked out at the Atlantic and saw, over centuries, not a barrier but a direction. They sent their goods to each other. They sent their scholars and their soldiers and their diplomats. They sent their students and their sailors and their families. The sea between them accepted all of this and delivered it. The mint tea and the dram sit side by side on the long table of time, both still warm, both still offered, two gestures that mean the same thing in two different tongues. You have come a long way, I see you, sit. Let that be the closing thought of this chapter. Not a grand conclusion, not a lesson, just the two gestures, side by side, meaning the same thing. The rest is silence and sea air. And now let everything slow. Esioyu era is very quiet at this hour. The craftsmen packed away their tools at dusk. The cedar shavings that scented the afternoon have dried and settled. The fish stalls are dark and clean. The blue boats are tied at their moorings, rising on the Atlantic swell in a rhythm so regular it has ceased to be a sound and become simply a presence. The amber lanterns in the Medina narrow passages throw their light on whitewashed walls. A cat crosses the courtyard of an old house and disappears under a gate. Somewhere deep in the Medina, the last glass of mint tea tonight is being poured. The liquid catches the light as it falls. The glass is placed on the tile floor beside a sleeping child. The ramparts above the harbor are empty. The old cannons along the seawall have been there for centuries, incorporated so long into the stone that they seem to have grown from it. The Atlantic beyond the walls is a darkness and a sound, arriving, withdrawing, arriving again. The wave does not know it is ancient, it simply comes. The lighthouse beam sweeps across the black water. One long arc, then darkness, then the arc again. If there are ships out there, they will see it as a comfort, a known point, a harbor that has been here since the 18th century and is still here, still lit, still open. The light says nothing except, this place has not gone away. Now move northward in the mind. Follow the Atlantic up past the strait, past the lights of the Spanish coast, into the Bay of Biscay where the water deepens and the swell grows long and cold. Up past Brittany, past the tip of Cornwall, northward into the grey-green latitudes where the light changes entirely and the air has a different weight. The Clyde at night. The river is quieter than it was in the great working years, but it is not silent. The water holds the light of the far bank, wobbling and soft on the surface. A cargo vessel moves slowly downstream, running lights red and green, heading for the open water. The wake fans out and fades, and the river is still again. The docks at Greenock, where Moroccan goods arrived and Scottish goods departed across more centuries than anyone has fully counted. The cranes are still now. The warehouses are dark, but the bones of the place are there, the understanding between land and water that made this a working harbor for so long. The river carries the memory of all it has moved. On the Clyde bank, the sodium lights make orange pools on wet stone. The smell of the estuary, salt water meeting fresh water in the particular way that only an estuary smells, something no other place has. Anyone who grew up near this river carries that smell in the back of the memory, reliable as a name. The same moon is above both harbors tonight, not a poetic device, simply true. The moon that puts its light on the Atlantic swell off Esyoyuera is the same moon laying a pale track across the Clyde. Both sets of boats rock beneath it. Both sets of moorings hold. The 2,000 miles between the harbors means nothing to a moon. The same gulls. In the morning, when the light returns, they will be there on both sides. On the Esyoyuera ramparts, grey and white against the Atlantic blue, rising and settling on the sea wind. On the Clyde Keys, lifting off the dark water, banking over the warehouse roofs, their call carrying across the river the way it has always carried. They are the same birds in the deep sense, the same species shaped by the same ocean. They follow the fish, they follow the ships, they follow the smell of the tide and the wind off open water, and they do not know or care which country's coast they are resting on. The sea is one body of water. The birds have always known this. The sea between Scotland and Morocco has been called many things: a boundary, a highway, a threat, a road home for men who prayed to see it from the other direction. What it has never been is a wall. Walls divide. The sea connects when the people on either shore are willing. Scotland and Morocco were, more often than not, willing. Think of all the crossings made across these centuries. The merchant vessels running south with wool bales in their holds, riding the wind that funnels down between Ireland and the Iberian coast. The same wind pushing the return journey north, the hull now lower in the water with Moroccan leather and wax and hides. Wind that belongs to no one, serving everyone. Think of the letters that crossed this water, the captive's careful words, written to be read by unknown eyes before reaching the family who needed them. The consul's dispatches, meticulous and measured. The traveler's journal entries, written by lamplight at the end of a hard day's riding, the pen moving across the page while the atlas dark settled outside. Think of the knowledge that crossed. The Moroccan scholar timing machinery in the Woolwich arsenal with a mathematician's eye. The Scottish geologist counting glacier stones in the high Atlas, astonished. Two kinds of attention, both honest, both trying to understand a world larger than their own familiar one. All of that crossing, all of that exchange, happened on this same water. The same Atlantic that is running its slow breathing tonight outside Esyoyuera and pushing the Clyde downstream to the sea. The water remembers nothing, but the record of the crossing exists in archives and ledgers and museum cases and the grain of timber and the cells of descendants on both shores. Scotland and Morocco, two old nations that never warred with each other, only traded and visited and wondered. Two peoples shaped by coastlines and difficult terrain and the particular seriousness that cold winters and high mountains teach. Two traditions of hospitality that arrived independently at the same understanding. The stranger is worth more than the inconvenience. Their connection will not be in the textbooks. It does not appear in the grand sweep of the history taught in schools. It lives in smaller places, in a Kirk session minute from 1675, where two sailors' names were read from a pulpit, in a ledger entry for Moroccan leather arriving at Leith, in a Moroccan bowl in a Scottish museum, in a man buried in Tangier with a Scottish name above his grave. In a Glasgow tenement stairwell where the smell of cumin and lamb announced that something new was happening. In a dormitory room in Edinburgh where a Moroccan student received a mug of strong tea on a grey November afternoon. In the ordinary, unremarkable, real and lasting human act of one person saying to another, "You have come a long way. I see you. Sit." The night is very deep now. The stories told tonight are all resting. The merchants and the captives, the diplomats and the travelers, the scholars and the sailors, and the families who came and stayed. All of them settled into the quiet that the night eventually offers to everyone who has done enough for one day. The cedar forests of the Atlas are dark and still. The old trees stand as they have stood through every century this story touched. Their wood built the houses of Fez. Some trace of it found its way onto Scottish ships and into Scottish homes. A small, quiet connection between the mountain and the northern city, made of timber and trade and the long logic of commerce. The Scottish hills are holding their particular summer darkness, that near darkness of northern latitudes where the sky never fully blacks out and the shapes of hills remain visible against it. The lochs below them lie perfectly still, the same stillness that has held this landscape through all the departures and arrivals, all the crossings made and crossings returned from. The waves continue, off Esjoera and off the Clyde and off every coast between them. The rhythm that was here before any harbour was built and will be here long after the last harbour crumbles back into the shore. Arriving and withdrawing, arriving and withdrawing. It asks nothing of you. You need only listen. Your breath can follow it if you like. In as the wave arrives, out as it withdraws. There is no hurry. The wave will come again. It always does. The old road between the two harbours is still open. The same sea, the same moon, the same gulls in the morning on both shores. The glass of mint tea and the dram are still on the table, both warm now with the warmth of something offered freely. The gesture is the same in both cases, and it means the same thing across 5 centuries of contact between these two peoples. You are here, and that matters, and there is no rush. Rest now, the harbours are safe, the boats are tied, the history has been remembered, the hospitality has been given and received across mountains and salt water and the long span of years. You have been a long way tonight. The journey is finished. You can set it down. The sea does not sleep, but you can. It will keep the watch. The lighthouse beams will turn. The moorings will hold. The water will arrive and depart with its reliable rhythm all through the darkness and into the first grey light and the coming morning. None of that needs your attention now. Somewhere between the two harbours, out in mid-Atlantic where no ship passes tonight, the water is deep and dark and lit faintly from below by the slow cold light of creatures that have lived in that darkness longer than Scotland and Morocco have had names. The surface is clear, just the ocean breathing, connecting every coast to every other coast, as it has always done. This is the third and final part of Scotland and Morocco. The sea road has been travelled in full now. The medieval merchants and the Corsair century, the physicians and the journals, the looking north and the modern threads, and finally this, the two hospitalities, the same gesture in two tongues, the two old nations at rest beside each other on the long table of time. The history does not end. It only rests for the night, as all things rest. The connection between Scotland and Morocco is still being made, in classrooms and counting houses and kitchens and on football pitches, by people who do not think of themselves as continuing a centuries-old story, but who are simply by being who they are and knowing who their neighbors are. Let the harbors go, let the lanterns dim, let the cedar smell and the salt air, the taste of mint tea and the warmth of the dram drift gently away now. They will be here when you come back. The history does not go anywhere. It waits, patient as the sea, for the next person who wants to know it. Two harbors, two peoples, one long story told across 3 nights. The sea between them never a wall, always a road, always open. The same gulls, the same moon, the waves arriving and withdrawing in both places now as you sleep. Good night from Tartan Lullaby. This has been the sleep history of Scotland and Morocco. Sleep well. That's where we'll leave it for tonight. The story is finished, but the night isn't, so let this play on as long as it helps. If Tartan Lullaby has been good company, you're welcome to subscribe so the next story finds you. There's no rush. If you'd like to see the landscapes that go with these stories, the art prints are at TartanLullabyArt on Etsy, with mood boards and stills on Pinterest under the same name. The links are in the description below. Until next time, thank you for listening. Sleep well, all is well.